I'm indeed delighted to welcome my fellow panelists, uh, Professor Charles Dhanaraj, professor at the University of Denver, uh, a very dear colleague and a friend and friend from Pakistan, Professor Zahoor Hassan, whom I've known since the time that he was a professor and then later as the Vice Chancellor of the Lahore University of Management Sciences, Dr. Piyush Sinha, a former professor at IIM Ahmedabad and somebody who has really carved out his name primarily on the basis of research and his writings in the retail marketing itself. And certainly we have today a panel, I would say, that which is not only global, but one that brings in a phenomenal experience of dealing with the cases, writing the cases, and really bringing in not just many of the contemporary issues, but also at the same time bringing out some of the more and more fundamental issues that today affect the industry or that have affected the industry. And not just mainly the industry, but as I was listening to the panel earlier, some of the issues that were raised by Dr. Bajaj and Dr. Rajan in terms of going beyond the industry itself and looking at some of the human issues, or for that matter, legal issues, the political issues, etc., that are today very, very relevant. What I intend to do is I shared a mail with all of with you, Professor Charles Dhanaraj, Professor Zahoor, and Professor Piyush, that each one of you would possibly make about 10 minutes of your presentation and or an opening remark that they would take in about 30 minutes or so. And possibly the next 10 minutes, we're going to be having the question answers from the participants, which who's going to be moderating it? Uh, Anuja, or who's going to be moderating it? Raj, tell me that.
Dr. Anuja will give the questions.
All right. So Dr. Anuja would moderate would bring in the questions that are important for the panel, and we have just about 10 minutes. And the last 5 to 6 minutes, I would sort of use that kind of 5 to 6 minutes. Now, first of all, a part of that, and finally at the end, just to summarize it. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure that the last couple of hours that you have been with us, this must have been a very, very enriching time for you, spending immediately after lunch itself. Uh, Wonderful sessions with wonderful panelists looking at, what would be the role of the management schools in a case study development and actually making cases a reality itself. How does one really move away from a lecture methodology to more and more experiential pedagogy? And as I said in the inaugural session, the ICRC primary goal is to really develop a community of researchers and case writers in India who can really talk about India in a global context, and we can present it in we can present India in a global context itself. And certainly the last one was in terms of the case writers' personal experiences, and you had 4 professors really presenting their own experiences, which included Dr. Agarwal, Dr. Geeta Bajaj, Dr. Rishikesh Krishnan, and Dr. A.K. Sen Gupta. I, for one, believe that when we talk about world-class case, I think, or let's say a global case, the first thing that comes up to my mind is, what is a case? And what will really make a good case? As I said in my opening remark, I think one of the biggest problem in much of the case writing that has happened in this country has been the lack of rigor in case writing. There's not been enough of research, and I'm talking about I'm not talking about a few cases, but I'm talking about a large numbers that are there. So one of the biggest challenge that has happened, and that is there, is the lack of rigor. And when you have a lack of rigor, then in that case, who uses that case? except you, nobody else uses that kind of a case. Even after some, and possibly after some time, you yourself realize that, and if you're a good teacher, you realize that, well, what you're really wanting from the case, what you're wanting to lead the discussion there, of what you want the students to really be bringing out the issues in the case, that is not really happening. And then it's a time for you to then look at it. Is it really that the case that you have really developed has all those issues that you wanted the students to focus on? Now, that's where we talk about the role of the reviewers, which we have, for example, in the ICRC. Our ICRC process is a fairly stiff process. It's a 3-tier kind of a process where the cases that you develop are really the live cases, or maybe based on some secondary data itself, but leading towards a certain decision situation itself. And then after, it really gets reviewed by a panel of very distinguished experts from this country, who are some of the very well-known professors in their own rights in different fields. And based on that, the case writer is really asked to look at those kinds of reviewer comments, come back with their comments or rewriting or whatever that was required by the reviewers. And once that satisfies the reviewers and the editor, it goes to the editorial board for the editing purposes. And there are regular kind of editors who really edit it for English, for grammar, for let us say, everything that is really required. And then finally it gets handed over back to the case writer for getting the company's formal approval. A very important part of a case writing is the formal approval of the company for the data that one is really going to be using for the learning purposes. And the next part is that of the teaching notes, because one of the, again, the missing link is the teaching note. And if you haven't really prepared a good teaching note, the case cannot necessarily, the case suffers with some kind of a limitation itself. And finally, once we have got all this, the case is ready for an upload on the India Case Research Center. With these kind of stuff, the question is therefore, what is a good case? How does one develop a global case in this kind of a context? What are the issues that are going to draw the attention of the management schools across the world and the students? And finally, is there a story that one can really build in India, South Asia itself? This, let me start with, first of all, with Professor Charles Dhanaraj, the professor from the University of Denver, who has also been a faculty with us, doing some of our training programs as we were really developing some of the case writers itself. So may I invite Professor Dhanaraj?
Thank you. Thank you so much. I know this is the day is ending for you and it is starting for me. So can you hear me very well, Dr. Saxena?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're loud enough. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much. I know you must be exhausted and tired hearing a lot of stuff through the day. I want to just touch on 5 points. I think we have moved on a lot. Now we have, I think my last count, if you look at the number of cases that are being written on Indian context, it has just been phenomenal. Like if you had gone back 2 decades back, we hardly had cases on India. Now, some of the best cases that go in the case center is from India. So it's a big journey that we have come. I want to touch on, I heard a lot in the last few hours about writing research-based cases. And if you want to write a world-class case, how can you connect some of the research work and some of the teaching work? In fact, oftentimes we think about teaching and research as two parallel roads. We never connect them together. So my goal in this next few minutes is to see if we can connect the two worlds, because you and I cannot be effective faculty without doing good research. And our research should make our teaching better. If that's what you want to do, how can we connect these two, right? Now think about a lot of us are writing about case research. A lot of us are writing about writing for teaching, right? Now, how do we connect the two? In fact, this is a very what do you call a straw research on. If you look at over 50% of the management scholars are writing on qualitative studies. In fact, if you look at the dissertations that are coming out from IIMs, the SP Jain, and some of the leading institutions, there are a lot of qualitative studies that are coming out. So we are doing a lot of qualitative research. And at the same time, we are also writing teaching cases, but invariably they are two different audience. And what I'm suggesting is, can we integrate? I mean, can we explore how to integrate the case research and case writing? And how do we leverage one another? If that we can do, that would be a remarkable accomplishment, and that can take us to a new level altogether. Now, if you think about it, I mean, why are we writing cases? In fact, a lot of times when I meet with researchers, like, hey, I don't get reward for writing a case. Why should I write a case? And a lot of time, teachers who are teaching, who are exclusively in teaching, wonder why should I be even worried about research part? Okay, and in fact, it is connecting the two that you enhance your teaching. And in fact, when you're able to bring a fantastic teaching case, you develop a new knowledge, and that should bring to a journal, or that should be a journal that should be interested in what you are developing. Okay, so to some extent, it is the knowledge enhancement that comes from connecting the two worlds, right? Now you think about, what do you really do when you're writing a case, right? You're writing a case. In fact, Geeta spoke very eloquently, and Rishi spoke as well. I mean, we are bringing real world issues into the classroom, right? And what do we really do when we write? We are taking a business story and laying an intellectual framework, right? We are creating teachable moments from the type of business situations that anyone can read in a Wall Street Journal or Times of India, or any newsletters, right? What a journalist does is bringing the situation and giving his investigative report. What an educator does is turning it into a teachable moment, right? Now, if I can share with you my experience writing this Eli Lilly in India case, I think some of you may be using it in your classes. And this case we wrote in 2004 when Lilly and Ranbaxy were considering separation, right? So it was a news story all around, and then we just took the case, and then we basically developed, how do we use this moment to make it into a teachable moment? In essence, laying a framework that students can understand what do we mean when we talk about the institutional context driving the partnership logic, or what do we mean by the dynamics of partnerships, right? All these are interesting issues in theory. When you put it in the context of a case, it really fires up. And in fact, over the last 18 years, since we wrote that case now, it is still one of the bestseller, and it creates wonderful experience in the classroom, right? So to some extent, writing a good case is all about providing a good, sound intellectual framework. And that's where I would like to draw your attention more and more. And remember, there is no one size fits all. There are lots of genres that you can write about, and increasingly with all the digital world. Now, imagine we are all doing this virtual, and you would not have even imagined so many virtual conferences a year back, right? COVID has given us a gift about using the digital media, right? How do we develop the cases to apply and work in the digital media? For example, we just wrote a case. I mean, today the DEI, diversity, inclusion, is a big agenda. So we basically wrote a case of a manager facing a situation in South Africa and brought it to the context. Now, And in the case, basically, it's a 2.5-page case, and it puts the student in the situation of dealing with a cleaning lady in South Africa. And we just get the students to start doing the role play. In fact, it's a lot of the teaching is not just coming from negotiations or from the class discussion, the Socratic discussion, but it comes from just getting them to take on a role and role play. So in a digital media, it works beautifully, right? Once the students experience the role play, you can bring them back and get them to debrief, and then bring them to apply the context, apply that knowledge to the context. So think about using multiple genre, and that could be a phenomenal help. And finally, this is my fifth and final point. A lot of you are writing cases. Why don't we try to take it and use it to see how we can advance the research side? Can you think about it? In fact, I'm putting 4 different models where you can use. For example, the Eli Lilly in India case that we wrote basically provided a foundation for a lot of what I did in research that was published later in other journals, right? So use your case to understand a phenomena and build up your research side. Number 2, you can think about a case to sort of 2 different sides of the coin. For example, Rishi is here. He was a co-author on that. In fact, one of the doctoral students, in fact, she's a professor now at IIM Bangalore. We wrote basically a study on Cisco, which is now one of the bestsellers. In fact, one of the bestsellers in the case center in Europe. And it was also published as an SMR article. In a sense, the article provides the research framework, the case provides the teaching. So think about your case as a two-sided dragon in a sense. One side you can address the teaching issue, and another side you can address the research issue. Or think about it as a kaleidoscope. In a sense, a case we wrote on, in fact, Glenmark, Biocon, Gilead. In fact, we wrote a series of case studies on biotechnology firms or pharmaceutical firms getting into research. And that eventually turned out into a manuscript, which we are still under review for doing what we call as scaling social ventures. How do we address some of the social issues with research? So you can combine multiple cases and use it for building some of the research work. And finally, the multiple cases for complex phenomena, like if, some of us who are teaching in international management, we use Bartlett and Goshaw. The whole work started as a series of cases on multinational corporations, right? And that's a great model. Like, given some of the big issues that are unfurling in India, corporate governance or whatever you want to take it, writing a series of cases and then using those cases and connecting them into a research framework. Those are wonderful opportunities waiting for us. Thank you, Dr. Saxena.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Dhanaraj. You made some very interesting kind of an observation with regard to the case research and case writing and the integration that is really important. There's also in terms of linking the teaching and research scholarship, and I'm going to be coming back to you on this, particularly when we really talk about it from the perspective of global collaboration for case writing. Because when we start talking about it in terms of the global case, how can we really encourage such a kind of a collaboration between the faculty members, and that can really help us to develop a good case study. Professor Zahoor Hassan, would you like to now take the stage?
Sure. Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity. I think I've been part of this conversation for the last almost an hour, and I think a lot of interesting ideas have come in, so I'll not repeat. And I think our colleague earlier on important lot of perspectives. I'll just add a few things from my own experience. So I've been writing cases for the last 35 years. And started writing cases primarily because I had to write cases. That was the requirement of the institution which I joined. And I was told in the first week of my job that, okay, go meet this organization and find out whether you can write a case. So that's how it started. But over the years, my approach to case writing, and I have just 3-4 cases already in review right now, has evolved. And I think the main reason that I look at case writing differently today as compared to, say, 35 years ago, is that my motivation or purpose for writing the cases has changed. So I would suggest to everyone that if you want to write a quality case, and if you have a quality case, it's going to become a world-class case and use the others. And then when you define what will be needed to have a quality case, I think a lot of things have been said. But before you can write a quality case, you need to understand that domain. A lot of people try to write cases about issues that they have very little understanding. As was mentioned, if you are not aware of the theory, if you don't have underpinning in that area, and the curiosity to actually go out and explore issues in a rigorous way, you will not write a good case. Case is not a story, because whether we like it or not, case is not an actual situation. It is a situation, you take things from an actual situation, you slice it, you dice it, and you edit it to achieve a certain purpose. And many of the good cases need to leave out certain things and need to provide additional information which the actual decision maker never had in order to achieve the learning objective which I mentioned earlier. So you need to have some clarity in terms of what you are trying to do. And you need to have a very high level of curiosity. So the best cases that I have been able to write were the ones where I came across a person or an organization in the context of organization, and they started talking about something which was of interest to me. And after detailed conversation over a number of sessions, I felt that, okay, this fits into something that I want to do as part of my teaching portfolio, and sometimes also my research portfolio. Okay. And then I have stayed with that theme for, in many cases, number of years. Like in the recent past, I've been looking at agri-value chains. So now I eagerly look for new developments in that area. How do people bring value to the small farmer in a developing country? So, and I have opened up many avenues for my own exploration, and I personally think that I'm doing something which nobody has done before. That's my excitement about writing those cases. And then I have to educate myself. I have to talk to many people. And it usually takes almost a year before I could have a case in a form that I could actually teach it. So it requires a lot of patience. If you want to develop something original, it will require a lot of patience, talking to a lot of people, looking at background information. So if you want to write a good case, you need to make sure that you don't put too much time pressure. So that's something. The second thing which has helped me is that when I realize that I am entering a domain where I don't have all the background, and I would like to have another colleague join me so that they can bring in their expertise, I have been then open to actually partnering. If I want certain type of analysis done in the case, because case and the teaching node go hand in hand. You need to have clarity in terms of what are you going to achieve through this case. That needs to come very early in the process, because otherwise you may have a very interesting story and you don't know how to use it, and then you lose interest in it. At least I do that. So it has to fit into your agenda in terms of your teaching or your research agenda. And for that, it is very important that you analyze the situation from a certain specific perspective. And I write cases primarily for two purposes. Primarily, third could be added. One is that each case class that I go into, I am not primarily focused on developing the students' understanding of that discipline. That is my second objective. My first objective is to develop the ability to think, analyze, and be open. I'm developing their way of looking at problems because I teach in the MBA program, so that's my main objective. So my case has to have enough in terms of the background information, because I want students to look at things in a more holistic way. So I have generally been accused of writing long cases with a lot of background information, because I want students to connect things. I want them to look at integratively. But anyway, that's the way I am. And sometimes my case takes too long to get published because I am always reluctant to take things out. That links in with my style. In class also, I'm trying to bring in those. Even I teach operations, I want to talk about the human side, I want to talk about the regulation side. So a case is in many ways a reflection of your own approach to teaching, if it's the main purpose is teaching. So you have to not mimic somebody else's style. You have to take a style which fits in. But if a really great case is the one that others can also teach. If a case can only sing in class, if you are the singer, then it's not a good case. And for that, you need to have a comprehensive teaching. You need to develop a way of explaining to others how the case could be used. And for that, of course, you need to link up with theory, you need to have a teaching plan, you need to have, and in my cases, all the cases which I send out for review have been taught in class on a trial basis, maybe 2 to 3 times. I would not write the teaching note, even the first draft, unless I have taught the case once. That's where the real case emerges for me, because I know what works, what doesn't work. And then you have to be willing to make those adjustments, make those edits, add things or take out things. So those are a few things. A lot has been added, already said, so I would not like to sort of repeat that. So basically, to sum up, your purpose has to be very clear, you have to be very patient, it has to fit in your own style and your objectives. I have had a couple of situations where I had a collection of cases from where I got a research article. And that was, in many cases, or in all the cases, actually an afterthought. So once I had a series of 4 or 5 cases which covered a certain domain from different angles, I was able to get a decent article out of it. One of my cases which got into CRJ got there because of the colleague who was working with me. I lost interest in that case once it was good enough for me to teach in the class. But he needed a publication. So he kept working on it and added a lot of bells and whistles so that it could be published. I never teach the published version in the class. I teach the earlier version that suits my requirements. So which is available as our own case, not the published case. Many of the published cases, in my view, lose the things which work in the class. Because when you have 3 or 4 reviewers who are trying to tell you do this, do that, you lose a lot in that process, in my view. So that maybe I'm going against the grain of things. A published case in a journal may not be the best case to use in class. So I don't know, I can take questions, but this is what I need to wanted to share with you.
Thank you, Professor Zahoor and Piyush, Professor Piyush Sinha.
Good evening, everyone. Whatever I've been hearing so far from such stalwarts, maybe I will be repeating a lot of it actually, because the crux of what Professor Zahoor and Professor Charles were talking about. I'm going to show you a slide, small slide, which is I think it's going to be repetition, but I still take it. Before I get into the slide, I must say one thing, that I write cases for myself. I do not write cases for anybody else. And therefore, I don't have anything in front of me when I write a case. In the sense that, yes, it's like a story. When you're writing a story, you're writing it for yourself, the way you see the world to start with. Then, of course, you know that the story has to either fit or not fit, or whatever it is, has to serve a purpose. And the purpose is, of course, a business decision to be taken. So the first thing that I always keep in mind is that I never write a functional case. Although it could be slotted under a function, under a topic or whatever it is, but I always take it as a business case. Because there's no problem which is a functional problem in business. We all know it. And therefore, until this I learned a little later, but what I realized that unless I create a 360-degree view or allow people to have a 360 view of the problem, they will not be able to solve the problem as such. And therefore, in most of my case teaching also, when my cases which I've written, there's a lot of inside in the case, outside the case. I keep moving from inside the case to outside the case to bring in the real example also, because we all know that there's a limitation to the case. It is time, it is restricted, and many times what happens that most people would have already read about what the company did. So in that case, the question is not about what the case is, what the company did. It's a question of what I would do if I were in that person's place, as simple as that. And that is where one has, when I write a case, I simply see, am I able to create a multiple view of the same problem so that one can arrive at a good decision. And the most gratifying situations have been where actually number of times we discussed the case of the company that I was doing a training program for, and that led to development of strategy of the company, completely new way of looking their own businesses. You know, that is the aha moment. You know, which when you look at that, you wrote a case, it brought different dimensions of thinking, and the way you discuss it, the company went back and said, yeah, I think we have got a new strategy to be looked at. So that's something which is what if you ask me, that was the biggest aha moment. Or in the class, you realized, I realized in the class in the discussion, while discussing the case, I realized that this is a dimension of the subject which I had not thought of in bringing that into the classroom. And through the discussion, that dimension came out, and which actually led to, and as Dr. Zahoor and Dr. Dhanaraj was saying, that led to actually picking up that thread and doing research work later on. So I would submit here that I would not say case versus research versus article versus this. I think it's an academic piece. Case is an academic piece. It's a story. And like any good story writer, right? You ask that person, he says, look, I understand the story. The others understand, I don't bother. Right? But the fact of the matter is, at the end of it, the students are my target, my other teachers are my target, which is also there. So that is where broadly the framework which Professor said, Professor Charles Dhanaraj said, I'm going to share that framework which I use. And then it is reiterating what he said, but I'm just going to highlight it again. That I take the case as a composition of context, experience, and theory. It is not just one thing. For a simple reason that later on, of course, whether you write a teaching note or you don't write a teaching note, but until the decision that is going to be made on that case is based on some good conceptual framework or models, it's not sustainable. Right? You don't know how to. I use this framework to say how to solve cases, how to arrive at a decision which is sustainable, which gives you sustainable competitive advantage. So this is a question which I always keep in mind, that I'm writing a case. Am I giving enough information to the reader that the person can develop a strategy which is good for future? That's the basic idea. Whichever subject, whichever topic that we are going to pick on, right? So therefore, context is data, people, and opinion, which will help people triangulate, listen to the data. That's something that I always tell people, that when you read the case, can you hear what the data is saying, not what you're reading? Can we read between the lines? That's one. Second, experiences of people, not just those who are part of the case, in the sense that many times nowadays you have access to so much information. So can I bring in some kind of a video, some kind of a example from other industry which can actually bring in, or experiences of other people who have faced similar problems, that could be brought in, and the theory, of course, is something which all of us are talking about. So when you put all these in this, then one starts looking at as to how this thing will actually pan out. But like any other story writing that you do, I don't think you right from day one, you know exactly what the case will come out to be. It depends upon, and therefore it becomes an iterative process, right? It takes maybe 3 or 4 rounds before you can really look at what it is. You can't be just writing in one shot. I will be very, very happy. I would actually like to learn from those who can write the cases in one shot, right? But that has not happened to me. And other thing which I do, that when I'm writing the case, I write it in totality. Later, you could decide which way to cut, depending upon where do you want to use the case. So part A, B, C, whatever it is, or focus on what particular aspect or second aspect is something that can be done. Or a small case out of that, a caselet out of that itself could come out. But the idea is that when I'm writing the case, I know what the problem is, right? Broadly, the problem is. And therefore, it is, first of all, it follows the typical problem solution pedagogy of really identifying what the problem is and what information is required to solve that problem. That's one. And then supporting what is the framework, that theoretical framework, conceptual framework that could go into it, which will help me in writing the teaching note later on. That's something which is, it's a different thing that I don't use teaching notes when I'm discussing the case, because I find them sometimes very restrictive. So, so I teach the case the way I feel that I wanted to use, and that's a request that everybody, to everyone. While teaching note could be helpful, but please do not get restricted by that. It's a very good tool to restrict you. It's very, to make the case teaching very easy, but it's also very restrictive because it's one person's view of the case. It's not, and therefore, as a teacher, it becomes imperative on me to bring out different dimensions in the classroom from different students or participants. And what is interesting, that same case, all of you must have experienced it. Same case has been, I mean, different issues come out, discussion takes a different way altogether, and the kind of theoretical framework that you wanted to bring in, that anyway you bring in, but there are new things that come out of the cases when you're discussing the case. So I would take it as a story. And I'll finish by saying that let's take it as writing a story which you love to write, right? And please write it the way you. I'm glad Dr. Zahoor was saying that there's no one style of writing a case. Please not get bound by that particular style. There are broad guidelines which make a good case. That's fine. But I think first thing is that, like any story, it has to be interesting to read. It has to push you to think, right? And it has to suddenly give you that aha moment while reading the case itself, that yes, I think there is something in it. Let's go for the treasure hunt, right? And there are different ways that we can write the cases: the individual based, organization based, the cases which are open with no problem, the cases which have specific problems, right? The cases which are very heavy on data, cases which are not necessarily data heavy but qualitative in nature, conversational, right? So there are so many ways to, and again, I conclude by saying that if I were to write a story, and if there is a framework for a story, please follow that. But most people do not follow a framework in writing a story. All good stories have their own way of presenting themselves. Thank you, Dr. Saxena.
Thank you very much, Professor Sinha. Anuja, can we really take it? There are some questions over here. We have, well, I must put across some of the key points that both Dr. Zahoor Hassan and Dr. Piyush Sinha made. Professor Zahoor Hassan was talking about it from the perspective of understanding the domain. And that, I think, is so very critical, because unless and until you research and understand the domain, you won't be able to write a good case. Because that really gets you inside this part of it. And if you haven't really got into the skin, as we say, you cannot really write a good case. And that's what Dr. Sinha was saying, Piyush Sinha was talking about in terms of a story. A story is really something which is absorbing, which gets a person to identify himself or herself with some of the kind of role people there, the actors there, the characters there in the case. And that, I think, is so very important part, but that can really happen when you really understand the domain. And the next one was that of really bringing in another colleague to write the case when he felt that, this was an area which he didn't understand so well, and therefore bringing in another faculty colleague or another colleague to really join in to write a case. So which is where your collaborative part comes up. I like, Piyush, what you said about, the story and if I don't like the story that I'm writing, then in that case, it isn't really worth it. And that, I think, is so very important. If we as a faculty member don't understand our own stories, if we don't write an interesting story that interests us, there's no way by which the students would get interested, and which is where, and only after that you really test it. The pilot is very important before you really open it up to the larger public itself or to the larger student group itself. And bringing in a 360-degree view, which is what both Dr. Zahoor, Hassan and Dr. Sinha also pointed out too, and Dr. Dhanaraj also brought it up. Well, let's now see what are the questions that are there that Anuja has been able to identify. We'll take about 2 questions, and with that, first question, 1 round, and then we go to the second round with 1 more question or the 3, and if the time permits, because we are already hard pressed with the time now. We got to do a hard closure at 6:45.
So the first question is, what are the creative ways to write cases? Would personal connotations also are okay to be included in the case study? This is for Piyush Sinha, sir. I'll repeat the question.
Yeah, please.
What are the creative ways to write cases? Would personal connotation are also okay to be included in a case?
Yeah. First of all, if in most cases, when you are writing a case, it is a story of somebody else, not your story to start with. Because there is a protagonist, there is a situation that is being described. So and therefore it is a kind of it's always good to take a third person's view on the whole thing, because then you are not aligned to a particular thing. You are trying to narrate a story as a third person. That's something which is there now. Having said that, I think personal experiences, personal anecdotes, all that can add value to it, because if you have had a similar experiences or similar kind of narratives which could be brought into the case, that's something that's something which can be brought in. Different creative ways. The answer is as many of us. Each one of us has to have our own style of writing, right? There is no given that this is the only way that the case can be written. Maybe the structure is there, but that's also not a sacrosanct structure. We tend to follow it because everybody writes that way. That's what it is. But the basic principle, as I've been saying, that right from where the word go, it has to be riveting. That's it. Till the end, right? If one cannot finish the case in one sitting, that means the case is yet to achieve its objective. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Another question is for how to develop cases for practical subjects like accounts.
Would Dr. Zahoor, Hassan or Professor Dhanaraj?
I can try to take that, although I'm not, accounting is not my area. That's a tough one. And I think if you are teaching the entry-level accounting course, I've had my colleagues work in that area, you end up writing cases which are more like exercises. I've used to teach quantitative method, and we would have 2-page case where you given the data, given a certain situation, and you'll have to just run a model through and then analyze and sensitivity analysis and all that. So, but if you come to a more advanced accounting situations, there are situations where you can write. I think the questioner is probably coming from the fact that here you have to do a lot of number-based analysis for which you need a certain structure. Then, of course, cases can be written to achieve that objective, but the class handling has to be very different. Then the class will be very structured. When I teach something which is very quantitative, then I would actually lead the class through those 5-6 distinct stages, get a closure on each stage before you get to the next stage. Otherwise, students are going to be confused. But if I'm teaching something which is more broad-based, then the structure can evolve through whatever the students are saying. So I'll go in with the class with a very loose structure, as long as I'm very clear that out of these 6-7 things, at least 4 or 5 should come out. But in a quantitative subject like accounts, you need to go in with a very clear structure. And you can write cases. I don't know about India, but in Pakistan, interesting situations sometimes are not available. People are not willing to share some of the financial data. So that could be one challenge.
Yeah, Anuja, any other?
So the second question is in the connection of what Dr. Zahoor was talking about, that when there is lack of data and companies are reluctant to give that information, how do we tackle that?
You have two choices. One is give up writing that case if you are sure that you're not going to get actual data, or try to find some proxies. I've had this situation where they're not willing to give you the actual numbers, say in terms of the actual revenues or the profits, things like that. So you try to find a proxy which will give students a feel of what's going on. Maybe the number of customers, the something which will actually help you achieve the objective. And in some cases, you walk away. I mean, if you don't have the data that you need to actually build the story, as was mentioned earlier, then it's better to leave it. And sometimes after one or two interactions, you say, fine, maybe I can bring this person to class to talk about. And usually people are more open to talk about things in class than they are willing to actually let you write. So I have used another approach, which may be of use. In those situations, I do what I call live case. And some of those live cases have led to real cases. What I'll do is that I'll bring in a person, I'll give them a set of questions, which I want them to cover. They will actually make a presentation, maybe half an hour presentation or something like that. And then I let the students probe based on that presentation. And I usually record that session, notes, or I can do an audio video recording. And once the person has liked that environment being in the class and gotten excited about it, in almost 80% of the cases, they are more open to sharing information and they are less reluctant. So, I mean, that's one way which has worked for me.
That's so great. I think one more question which is there which is almost opposite to this one, which says that if you're using public domain data, how do we handle it into a classroom?
Professor Charles Dhanaraj, would you like to quickly take a...
Yeah, I think, see, right now you have access to so many databases, like even private companies, you are using like $1 million database and stuff. So public data is all, I mean, we should be able to make use of them. Now, again, the point is you're providing an intellectual framework on what is a commonly available material. So the proprietary or the uniqueness that you bring to the case is making it into a teachable moment. It's not so much of like what I think Professor Zahoor mentioned, like it's not like just making an accounting statement and it's not like writing a mathematical problem, but you are creating that ambiguity, that what you call that, the tension that Gita referred to. So that's where our creativity comes in. So it doesn't matter whether you are using public case or the field research, but can you create that type of ambiguity that leaders and managers have to deal with? If that an answer is yes, you got a case.
Right. Well, with all this, I'd like to thank all my fellow panelists. It's been a wonderful late evening, I would say, and concluding session is always one of those that should lead towards a much more kind of a, I would say, a thought generation and the churning of mind. And I can see that coming over when I look at the chat box and see some of the comments that have been coming in. It's been a wonderful kind of a session with all my three colleagues over here, three panelists over here. Thank you very much, Professor Dhanaraj, Professor Zahoor Hassan, Professor Piyush Sinha. As well, with this, we will close for this particular session. Thank you very much.